Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Quantum Dowsing, a new understanding of the ancient craft with Jim Willis. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. Please put your phones on vibrate or shut them off. No open containers. You can have your water bottles and everything like that, but no coffee cups or anything. Hopefully, Sandy Israel will get the labyrinth repainted, rechopped today in the parking lot, so you guys will be able to enjoy that, because the rain washed it completely away.
It did?
It did.
Oh.
And if you're interested, the Bogle Crystal is at the reception desk on the corner by the water or community area, and you can talk to Stonefeet, which would be out in front of the Bolton Center, and have a wonderful. Thank you.
Before we begin, I want to have Gary make an announcement about something special that's going to happen while we're in here. So, Gary?
Hi, a couple things. Maybe some of you were, I talked yesterday at 1:45. I talked about photon energy. For those of you who have missed the experience, I have a ring that is operating back there. You can stand in about 5 minutes and it will clear any additional energies and energize your water in your body and all that, so you can experience that over there. Also, as part of our dowsing exercises yesterday, there's a solar pulse that's going to hit Earth at 11 o'clock our time today and will last about 15-20 minutes. So something you might want to pay attention to or be aware of. That's in about 15 minutes or so.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a very high vibrational positive energy, so just be aware of that.
We'll be anxious to find out what happens at 11 o'clock. That's great. I imagine by now most everybody is pretty much on overload after a couple of days or a whole week for some of us being here. And what we'd like to do to begin is to just kind of relax and kind of build an aura of peace around us, and I find that the vibration of music sometimes does that. So I'd like to sing this song and let the music and the words perhaps just kind of envelop us and establish an intentional peace for our time together. Hold tight to the sound of the music of living, happy sounds from the laughter of children at play. Hold my hand as we run through the sweet fragrant meadows, making memories of what was today. We have this moment to hold in our hands and to touch as it slips through our fingers like sand. Yesterday's gone and tomorrow may never come, but we have this moment today. Tiny voice that I hear is my little girl calling for Daddy to hear just what she has to say. My little son running there on the hillside may never be quite like today. We have this moment to hold in our hands and to touch as it slips through our fingers like sand. Yesterday's gone and tomorrow may never come, but we have this moment today. Gentle words, tender touch, and time shared together, and someone who loves me and wants me to stay. Hold them near while they're here, and don't wait for tomorrow to sit back and wish for today. We have this moment to hold in our hands and to touch as it slips through our fingers like sand. Yesterday's gone and tomorrow may never come, but we have this moment today. Yes, we have this moment today. 100 years ago, a few far-seeing physicists turned the world upside down. The only problem was no one knew it at the time, and the very few people who did know about it didn't realize what was about to happen. But in the last 100 years, there has been a sea change of how we understand who we are and how we got to be here. So today, we're going to answer two questions. What is life all about, and why are we here? That's all. We'll have it all wrapped up by 11 o'clock, I'm sure. When these scientists began to talk about this new world they discovered, the world that underlaid us all, it set everything backwards. Even a great scientist such as Albert Einstein didn't want to accept it. Because before this great revolution of understanding of what they now call the quantum world, everything made sense. It was a beautiful universe. We could figure it all out. For every action, there was a reaction, equal and opposite. And there were all kinds of ways of mathematically describing what would happen. For instance, if you threw a ball up in the air, you could mathematically trace it by using the calculus and discover what the parabola was going to be. And by putting in different numbers like strength of the throw and humidity on the air and how fast it's going, you could determine exactly where it was in space at any time and where it was going to land. And the smallest matter was the atom, and everybody knew what the atom was. It was a nucleus with electrons and protons going around it. And it was a comfortable world. And now these scientists come along and say, that's not what it's like at all. And they discovered this wacky, wonderful world called quantum physics. The only trouble with quantum physics is it is so counterintuitive, it doesn't seem possible that some of the things that quantum physics predicts could possibly be true. And so when they began to talk about some of these ideas, people just shook their head and said, no, I don't believe it. Einstein called the idea of entanglement, for instance, the idea if you twist a particle over here, if it was entangled with another particle that's now over here, and I'm talking about the other side of the world, or even the other side of the universe, you put a clockwise spin on this one, and that one will start to spin counterclockwise. Somehow they shared information with each other, even though they were light years apart. And they didn't do it by sending information through some kind of space. It was instantaneous. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. And he just refused to accept the idea that it was possible. But in 100 years, every single quantifiable scientific experiment that anybody has ever done has failed to overturn the idea of quantum physics. It is probably the most tested and the most accepted theory in the history of science. And yet still, nobody believes it. The idea that the whole universe is entangled together. And the idea that we can have these vibrations that somehow speak to us in ways that we can't possibly understand. The idea of being able to check, for instance, a particle. If you want to know where it is, you can stop it and you can measure it and find out where it is in space, and it's a particle. But if you want to measure how fast it's going, it turns into a wave. And it's not either a wave or a particle, it's both at the same time. And now comes the spooky part. Until you look at it, it doesn't even exist. So Einstein said, you mean to tell me if nobody happens to be looking at the moon, it disappears? And he just simply wouldn't accept it. It's a wild, counterintuitive thought. And the only people who were not surprised by this were a group of shaman and dowsers and mystics who had been playing in this world for thousands upon thousands of years. And they were the ones who accepted it. They were the ones who were saying, yes, this is a world that's magical, it's a world that's different, it's a world that's connected. And now for the first time, science was beginning to describe what the Dowsers had been saying for as long as there have been Dowsers. All of a sudden, the scientists were the ones who started sounding strange. If you want to turn on the History Channel someday, or turn on the Discovery Channel and hear some of the things that are coming out of the words of scientists, and they're accepted for the first time because, I mean, after all, it's a scientist who's saying it. That means it's true, right?
Ancient aliens.
Yeah, and yeah, ancient aliens is really, and all of a sudden, people began to accept it. And when they asked, well, who are the ones who were really talking about magic nowadays? Who are the ones who were really talking about strange and spooky and wonderful and marvelous things? It's coming out of the scientists, not the metaphysical type people. But when we go back 40,000 years, when humankind took a great leap forward in our development, in our evolutionary development, 40,000 years ago, there were a group of shaman who for the first time began to, well, first time that we know about, I suspect it probably wasn't the first time, but the first time we know about, they began to go into these caves half a mile, 3/4 of a mile under the earth, and they began to have these visions of seeing alternate worlds, and they would draw pictures of what they saw. Strange beings and strange ideas, and the pictures are there on the wall at Lascaux and some of the and Pecmarl and some of these other places for us to see. And we realized 40,000 years ago they began to finally see the idea of an alternate way of looking at reality, and they began to put it right there. And the shaman would come out of the caves, and I'm sure that when they came back to their villages and they told the people what they saw, when the people went home to their caves that night, there was some man somewhere saying, honey, you won't believe what that shaman just told me. He's gone over the hill. He's wacko. He's gone over. He's telling us that there are other dimensions. He's telling us that there are other people, other beings who inhabit those dimensions. And they're not like us at all. Wow. I'm sure the wife must have thought, yeah, maybe it's time to move. The priest has gone over the deep end. Maybe we better start auditioning for a new priest or something like that. Now who's saying all those things? Scientists from MIT. They're saying the same thing, that the multiverse, we are not alone, and that somewhere, even out there in the far reaches of space, perhaps even in this dimension that we understand, but certainly right next to us in vibrational frequencies, right here in this room, there exist other dimensions, other beings, other energies. It's unbelievable that the scientists are saying now what the mystics have said for thousands and thousands of years. But now that they're saying it, something wonderful is happening in the history of the human race. For the last couple of hundred years, we've had science over here doing its thing ever since Isaac Newton, and it was fine. Science figured, they had it all figured out. There was a young scientist, piano player named Max Planck one time, whose teacher came up to him and said, you're deciding between science and piano? Max said, yeah, I don't know whether to be a concert pianist or a scientist. And his teacher said, Max, stick to the piano. Science is done. We know all that we're going to know. It's just filling in the details. Thank goodness Max didn't listen to his elders. He didn't become a concert pianist. He became a quantum physicist instead. But all of a sudden, here was science over here, and here were the Dowsing community, which has been around for thousands of years, and the mystics and the shaman, and of course going back to the times of the Druids, and all these people who intuited something very special going on, going along two roads, and now in our generation, in my lifetime, I've seen it come together like this, where the two are beginning to merge onto one lane of traffic. What does that mean? It means that probably for the first time in 40,000 years since we had that first breakthrough, when people intuited what was going on around them and the real reality, for the first time in 40,000 years, we have both the scientists and the Dowsers, the mystics, and all of those beginning to say, perhaps we are merging into one fast lane of traffic. That means that the human race is about to take a giant leap forward. It's assuming we don't destroy ourselves first, which that's another story. If you want to read how many times we've possibly done that, there's a book up here called Ancient Gods that I wrote last year that talks about previous civilizations and all those possibilities. But in our generation, we've seen this happen and happen quickly. So we have to have a quick history lesson to see where we are so we can fully appreciate what's going on. Do all of you have access to a handout, one of these handouts that we had? There's one more in the back, perhaps?
I don't have any.
No. If there are two of you together who can perhaps share or see one, just so everybody can see one, that'd be really great. Can we ran out. We'll make sure that you have one before we're done. But meanwhile, if you can just kind of look on with somebody, perhaps that might help. What we are seeing on part one, where it says part one theory, the ABA1 stage theory of metaphysical development. Don't you love that? How about that for a scientific term? We are about to learn the ABA1 stage theory of metaphysical development. Did I skip over the... Yeah, okay, I got it. This is a quick, on one page, a quick history of the human race when it comes to our understanding of spirituality. At the beginning, and I'm talking thousands of years at the beginning, people were operating, especially Dowsers, were operating under what I like to call intuitive ability. What this means is that Dowsers were using dowsing because it worked. They didn't know why. It just worked. If you had to find water, if you had to find earth energies, if you had to find something that was lost, they knew that they could, through using this dowsing techniques that they learned gradually over a course of time, they knew they could find what they were looking for. And they knew that it was going to work. And so it was simply an intuitive ability. And for thousands of years, we've seen pictures on cave walls of people with sticks. And we hear in the Old Testament about Moses going out into the desert, leading the children of Israel out into the desert. Moses goes out into the desert with his rod. And what does he find? Water. And we find all of these things. It worked. It was intuitive. Nobody needed to understand it. But then, unfortunately, something began to happen. People began to doubt what was going on. And so they moved into the period of history that's lasted for hundreds of years now that I like to call intellectual disability. We began to look below the surface and see that things didn't work the way we expected it to, and so we didn't expect them. And then when we didn't expect them, guess what? Didn't work anymore. And we entered into this B stage, intellectual disability. We gave vent to human curiosity. It was a wonderful thing. Drove us to extremes, but we did wonderful. We built skyscrapers, and we built these great road systems, and we walked on the moon, and we polluted our planet, and we found all kinds of ways to destroy each other and invented all this technology. It was a great time. But during that time, people would look back at what they now called superstition. What I called intuitive ability, they now just called it superstition, and nobody believed in it anymore. Now something is happening. We're moving into what I like to call conscious ability. We're beginning to believe in that ocean of energy, and science is even giving us a language to describe it. Now, in order to understand how these systems work, I like to use an example. We'll use Santa Claus as an example to understand ABA1 theory. When children are really young, they believe in Santa Claus. And if you ask them, who is Santa Claus? They'll tell you about a man in a red suit and a white beard, and he has a place up at the North Pole, and they can name all the reindeer. And Santa Claus is literally true, and children believe in the Santa Claus myth in a very real, literal way. But then something happens, long about first, second grade. Santa Claus agnosticism begins to rear its ugly head. And the children began to say, how is it that this guy could get in a sleigh and get all over the world and give presents to kids all in one night? Now, when they're really young, the parents have a great thing. The kids are in the A stage. They believe in a literal interpretation, and so they say, don't worry about understanding how he does it, honey. He just does it. It works. And so of course you're going to believe that. But as you develop away from the A stage toward the B stage, you get into this Santa Claus agnosticism when you begin to ask all the questions and say, it can't be. Your old way of understanding is falling apart, and so you're left with doubt, and you're left with fears. Now you still keep the tradition. You still want to have Christmas, because after all, Christmas gives you a holiday away from school, and Christmas brings you presents. So yeah, we'll keep it, but we begin to suspect that it's not the way we thought it was. And most people then spend the rest of their lives not believing in Santa Claus. They are Santa Claus atheists. They're in the B stage. Oh, feel sorry for those kinds of folks, you know. Because the original way of understanding doesn't hold up anymore, perhaps under scientific scrutiny, they have moved away from it and they stop believing. If you're really lucky, and if you stick with it, you can enter into what I like to call the A1 stage. That's the belief in Santa Claus. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, but it's understanding it in a different way. Perhaps not quite as literal, but a much more mystical way. And then you begin to understand that there really is a Santa Claus. He's not, I hope people here, I'm not ruining anybody's belief. They begin to understand that Santa Claus isn't a guy in a red suit, but something magical happens on Christmas. Instead, Santa Claus, instead of being one person, is a total system of loving parents that want to give to their kids and want to provide magic for their kids. And it's a total system, and it's a beautiful system. It's loving parents, and it's a culture, and it's music, and it's TV, and it's all that stuff that moves together. And who is to say that all of that great system isn't indeed Santa Claus, just understood in a new way? And so we can become Santa Claus believers again. Not in the old A sense, we've gone through that. Not in the B sense of rejecting that, but in the A1 stage of saying, it's real, it's just a whole lot bigger than I ever thought possible. That's the A1 stage. I think that human race is right now, when it comes to dowsing, and when it comes to the whole idea of understanding the reality, the basis of reality, I think the human race is in a position right now of moving into the A1 stage, and we are going to be different because of it. Nothing is going to be the same. And we need someone to lead us into that stage. That's why, hopefully, we are all here. We need dowsers today. We need elders. Elders who are comfortable in both worlds. Elders who have a foot in the world of the tradition. Elders who understand through intuitive ability that things work. And they may not need to know why, but they have an ability to do that. Now we need elders who can now explain in words that other people can understand what's going on in reality. What's really happening. How we are here. What this is all about. You are all elders. For you younger people who are here, I'm not insulting you at all. I mean it as a compliment, but we are all elders. We need somebody who are familiar with both, because the scientific world has been coming our way by describing things that we didn't quite understand before. They're giving us a language, and that's good. But on the other hand, they need to be open to what we have to say to them, because we've been living and playing in this world and exploring this world for thousands of years before they discovered it was there. We have much to teach them. So we not only need elders, dowsing elders, we need elders who are bold. Elders who will understand in a very loving way, and understand that it's going to be difficult, describe our craft, describe our science, describe what we do in ways that are going to be understandable to other people. How many times have you been in a conversation with people who you didn't know, and they asked you about dowsing, and you kind of said, well, yeah, douse a little bit, you know. No, can't be that way anymore. We have to say, yes, by dowsing we can understand this wonderful world that you're hearing about on Ancient Aliens. By dowsing, we can understand this wonderful world that you're hearing about on the History Channel. We can understand who we are and where we're going. By dowsing, we can actually reach across a space that is perhaps infinitesimal in size but huge in distance, and say that there we can find something that is very real. Now, in order to do that, we have to understand what science is saying about who we are. And so there's another page in here called A Slice of Reality, from Brahman to Atman. And I better describe this. Please do not take this too literally. I hope it's literal. I hope it can be, will stand up, but we won't know until it all comes together. It's just a way of trying to visualize what quantum physics and what the scientists are trying to say now about how life began and about how we are held together and who we are as a people. Before we get into that, anybody, questions, comments? I tend to talk a lot. You can interrupt me at any time. I won't mind, please. Anybody? Yes?
A lot of people say that humanity is moving to a new type of being.
Yeah.
The computer being, the technical being, sort of implants in our head.
Yeah.
Anthropocene era we're going into, and people of 50 years will have opened brains.
Mm-hmm.
So you heard about that. So that's a different view.
Yeah. The question, the comment was that many people are looking at this and trying to describe it. Basically, if I hope I have this right, they're trying to describe this in technological ways, that our brains are actually changing. We're becoming more computer-like, and I think probably in some ways that is true. What I'm arguing for is the fact that we can't lose the stuff of reality as well, the spirituality. And maybe what we're going to do next, what we're going to talk about next, will play right into that. Yeah.
But maybe this is off the topic. Do we have a moral obligation to let people know that they have geopathic zones in their house? Suppose you were selling your house and you knew that maybe seasonally you would have a geopathic zone. Are you morally obligated to tell the buyer that you live on a geopathic zone?
That's a great question. For those in the back who might not have heard, if you understand that there is a geopathic zone, for instance, in a house, that or any kind of anomaly in a house, and you're about to sell the house, do you have a moral obligation to let people know about this? That's a discussion that a lot of people, a lot of Dowsers, for instance, really talk about. Some say, yes, it's our job to say that. Others people say, well, if they ask, I'll say something. If they don't, I won't. A couple of years ago, a neighbor of ours came by. She knew us and accepted us, even though we were in South Carolina and not exactly current with a lot of South Carolinian thought waves. She came to us and she said, I've got a problem. And we said, what's that? My son and his wife are living in this house, and it's just full of all kinds of strange things going on. What do they do? They left the house last night because they heard this crashing and this banging, and they couldn't find anything, and their kids were scared, and they came to stay with us. I love my son, but they're staying with us because they don't want to go back to that house. What do we do? So Barb and I said, well, please bring us a diagram of the house and talk about it a little bit. And we sat out in front and we looked at it and we said, let's go there. And so we took our dowsing rods and everything and we went off to this house. And what we discovered was this house sat right smack on two huge energy lines that crisscrossed right in the middle of the house. And when we began to douse the house, now I have to explain this story first. I know I'm in a room full of Dowsers, so many of you will accept what I have to say, but I'm so used to speaking to people who are not Dowsers, and they think I'm wacko at this point. Right in the house itself, we discovered that there were indeed two entities in the house. It was built just after the Civil War. Jim Crow rules were in all of society, especially in South Carolina. One of the entities was black. One of them was white, the woman was white, the man was black. And they had had an affair after the time of the Civil War when that just didn't happen. And the black man was hung. The woman was not. She lived the rest of her life in that house under all of the community pressure that came on and everything else. And when we began to converse with these entities by using our dowsing rods, we discovered that they were very happy there. The energy worked. For the first time in their life, they could be together. What were we going to do? Send them on? Not if they didn't want to go. So we were perfectly content just to take this information and say, blessings on you, but please don't knock anything over when you're out carousing. And as far as we know, they're still living happily in that house, and they probably will until they're good and ready to move on. But it took all the fear out of it. It realized that entities can inhabit the same space we do, and we may not be able to understand, we may not be able to get it all, but we know that there are other entities out there. Not only the Dowsers are telling us this, not only the wackos out on the fringe, but the scientists are telling us the same thing, that the energies of these people were still there in that house. Now, we can call them whatever we want. In the old days, we called them ghosts. We don't like to use that term too much anymore because it has so much baggage. We can call them, well, anything we want, but I mean, you have to be careful the language you use, because when you say a word, you may be happy with it, but somebody else hearing you may not be, so we have to be very careful. All we know is that two people once lived here, and we can verify this historically. We know that a tragedy happened. We know that their energy is still together, entangled, and that these people are capable of communicating across a line that we can't even fully understand. But it's there, and it can be verified scientifically as much as intuitively. So, do we have an obligation to tell people this? I would sure try to work it into the conversation if I could. I don't know whether we have a moral obligation. I leave that to other people. I don't have to have a firm opinion because I'm not usually confronted by that. If I was, I'd probably have to develop a firm opinion pretty quickly. Does that help?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also live in an area that has a furniture store.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody goes in it. And then it had been a dress store before, and they moved out. It had been a grocery store before that, and they moved out. The business is there. They have geopathic zones right across the front of their house.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go in and tell them, but I know what's going to happen.
Sure.
They're going to tell me I'm wacko.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I mean, we could easily go over with rods and clear it.
Sure.
Or Bob could just clear it by decree.
Uh-huh.
But
That's.
I want to go and say, hey, look,
Yeah.
if your business increases after we get rid of it, in a year, pay us $50.
If the business increases, I'll bet you they'll want to pay a whole lot more than that too. They'll be so thankful for it, but it's difficult. Well, let's get into this slice of reality then to try to find out how science talks about who we are, and we'll see how it corresponds a lot to what Dowsers have been saying for thousands of years about who we are. Let's begin at the beginning. This slice of reality, and I call it a slice of reality because I'd like you to think of it as being a piece of pie. The point down here at the bottom expanding outward like this, and down at the point there is the source. And so, because I couldn't get it all on a piece of paper, this is just one piece of the pie, but in reality it's a big circle and the source is in the center. The source is the still point at the center of the circle. The source is the place of perfect peace. What do we call the source? That's a problem nowadays. There were times when I would have been very comfortable calling it God. I was a Protestant minister for 40 years. I guess I still am, although I haven't done any preaching for 8 years or anything like that. But I'd be perfectly happy calling the source God, except the word God has such baggage attached to it nowadays that when I say God and somebody hears God, they think I'm talking about their definition of God rather than my definition of God, and we can't communicate very well. So we call it the source. I like Skip Atwater's idea. He called it all that is. That's great. In New England native culture where we come from, where we originally came from, Kichi Manitou, the great mystery. We could find any word, call it love, call it anything, perfect peace, it's the source. I love the Hindu word for it. The Hindus use the word Brahman. And Brahman is great because you can't describe Brahman. Brahman is that place where language doesn't go. You can't soil Brahman by talking about it. When for many years I taught world religions at the college level, and I was not familiar at the time when I began with very much Hinduism, so I wanted to make sure I got this right. So I put my notes all together on Brahman and also Atman, which we'll get to in a minute. And I figured I had Brahman figured out, and I could explain it to a group of kids right out of high school, and it would be great. But I wanted to make sure I was doing it right. So I went down to a friend of mine who or an acquaintance of mine who became a friend, who was a practicing Hindu, and he had a little shop, and every morning he'd go into the back and he'd burn his incense and put his offerings, and I thought, he's the perfect one. I'll go find out who Brahman is. So I went and I talked to him, and I said, listen, this afternoon I'm teaching a class on Hinduism, and he said, oh, very difficult, very difficult. I said, yeah, I'm teaching it on Hinduism, and I'm trying to get the idea of Brahman across to the students. And he said, what will you say? And so I carefully went over this whole thing. Brahman cannot be explained. Brahman cannot be put within a box. Brahman cannot be understood. Brahman is the source. Brahman is God. Brahman is all of that. And I went on for about 15 minutes, and I figured I was good. I know what I'm talking about. And he's nodding like this all the time, giving me all kinds of great encouragement. And so I said, after about 15 minutes, I said, there, do I have it? And he looked at me and he smiled, he nodded his head up and down and said, no.
Well, he probably went this way.
And, so I learned my lesson, I've got to say, in that class, because that afternoon I did go and I did give the presentation to the students. And when it came time for the midterm, where we were doing Eastern religions, we had a midterm on Hinduism and Brahman. And I guess I still hadn't got it yet. I needed a hit on the head, because I had a 5-point question. And I said, in one well-constructed paragraph, describe the Hindu concept of Brahman. And students wrote, they're going to get 5 points for this. So they filled it in, writing small so you can get it all in and everything else. One kid, one of my best students, total blank. Nothing, didn't even try. So I took 5 points off his test, and I took it all in, and the next class I handed it all out, handed him back, and he's smiling in the back row like a Cheshire cat. He says, Professor Willis. I said, yes. Did everybody answer question 3? And I said, well, Paul, everybody at least tried. He said, you're telling me I'm the only one that got it right? I had to take his test back and give him 5 points for turning in a blank sheet of paper, because he was the one who really understood it.
Oh, wow.
It was really something. This is Brahman. This is the source. So when we talk about the source, here I go again, all these years later, trying to describe the still point and perfect peace of the source of Brahman. And here we are still trying to explain it, what it is. Well, picture yourself in perfect peace. This is hard with these minds that have evolved to work in this kind of a thing. Picture yourself in perfect peace, in perfect unity. There is no individual. If you are a thought, for instance, you're not sitting next to another thought, because there's only one thought. You're not sitting next to another no individual. It's just perfect unity, perfect peace. It's that one moment of time that sometimes in meditation we establish that time when we're not aware of anything. There are all kinds of ways of describing this. I love the Japanese way of talking about Brahman. I get a little off, I suppose, here, but I guess I can share it with you. Brahman is the orgasm that lasts forever. When you're not aware of anything. And this must be truer than we think, because when you watch movies, which I haven't seen, but I've heard that when you watch these kind of movies, when that happens, sometimes people say, "Oh God." I just throw that out as a researcher. This is that moment, that perfect peace. But think about this for a moment. How can perfect peace, how can perfect stillness begin to gather experiential knowledge of what it is? That's a question, isn't it? It's nice to be in perfect peace, but how do you gain an experience of perfect peace? So picture yourself in the source, and now all of a sudden you are a thought. And you begin to work your way out from the source, because as soon as you are a thought, you have differentiated yourself from perfect unity. See what I mean? So you move out into another area of existence where there are thoughts, and that's the area that I like to call consciousness, or the mind of God. Now, I'm not the first person to come up with this, obviously. I never had an original thought in my life. You'll find this in all the traditions. A wonderful tradition is right in the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible. In the book of Genesis, we have that wonderful idea of Eden. We have humans, one with each other, one with God, one with their environment, perfect peace. And then all of a sudden a thought arises. Let's eat the apple, see what happens. We always think that's a terrible tragedy, it's a terrible sin. No, maybe it had to happen in order for us to begin to differentiate, move out from perfect peace toward the world of experience. Now, we still don't have form, we still don't have shape, but we're a little, shall we say, thicker. We now have a thought, we have an idea, no mass yet, but we are moving toward substance. In other words, in the mind of God, or in consciousness, we have at least an awareness of something called uniqueness. Okay? With me so far? Okay. You're in consciousness, you're in uniqueness, you don't have any mass yet. How do you begin to establish that uniqueness corporally? How do you begin to establish that uniqueness with a form, with a shape? You move through the first field you encounter. Now, what are we going to call this field? I love what Ervin Laszlo has done. Great scientist, wonderful musician. He's recorded with the Budapest Symphony some of my absolute favorite piano concertos. But a fantastic mind, and he has said the only way we can describe this field through which from when we move is to bring back an old Sanskrit word from the Hindu, the Akashic field. Akasha. Now we are in the idea of thoughts of individuality. We're not individual yet. Plato talked about this too. He said a horse is an illusion. A horse is simply a body for what he called horseness. Okay? A horse isn't real. It comes and goes. Horse born, horse dies, horse changes. But horseness, ooh, what a thought. Horseness, humanness. We're not humans yet, but we're going to be getting a thought of what a human can be. Tree-ness, rock-ness. It's all in the field of Akasha. Now, as we move through this Akashic field, how are we doing for time, Barbara? I want to make sure I can get carried away on this and keep you here all day. What? Okay. Hi. Does that mean 15? Okay. We move through the Akashic field and we come to now the next stage. Quantum reality. That is the next stage of existence. I like to call quantum reality the place of thoughts and intuitions. This is the reality that was starting to be discovered by scientists. Sir James Hapgood Jeans, one of my favorite physicists from the old days, had a quote that's probably quoted in every single scientific, in every single classroom in physics there is in the world. He said, "The universe begins to look more like a great thought than a great machine. I like that idea. And that's the Akashic field. What's his name? Boy, being 71, named Deepak Chopra, has written extensively about this whole idea of the Akashic field, the field from which we come, the field to which we go, the field that gathers all of the experiential of anything that passes through it, the field of informness, informed field. And it is the field that just simply envelops everything. And, can't see it.
30 minutes.
Okay, great. It's a field that envelops everything, and through which everything goes on its way out to the edge, and through which all the information comes back into the Akashic field. It's the field of vibration. It's the field of potential. We're not really humans yet, but we have established the idea of humanness, and we are on our way. So what do? Well, we go through the field, through the reality of quantum reality, the idea of thoughts and intuitions, and we begin to go through the second field that we have established. And it's called, just discovered in our generation, the Higgs field. Poor Peter Higgs worked this out years ago in Scotland using nothing but paper and pencil, no handheld calculators, no nothing, predicting such a field. And he said, we're going to find what they called the Higgs boson at some point. Never thought it would happen in his lifetime, but we're going to find this. It is a field through which energy travels, and a thought or energy begins to take on mass and become something. It slows down enough to become mass-like. Now, if you ask a quantum physicist today if they believe in the Higgs field, they say, yes, we found it at CERN with the great, huge equipment that we have over there at CERN, and the what do they call it? The accelerator, the particle accelerator. And they even called Peter Higgs all the way from Scotland, says, better get over here right away, you're going to be surprised. And they announced it, and poor Peter Higgs was crying because he never thought he would see this in his lifetime. That's good. It's nice to know that the Higgs field is there, and it's nice to know that on this side of the Higgs field, things can begin to attract mass. Now ask a physicist to describe how it works, and they'll start to giggle, hysterically sometimes. How does it work? Over here, in this country, we like to say, well, it's kind of like, I like that, kind of like, you have to use a metaphor, kind of like going through a field of molasses. It slows you down and things begin to clump together. And on the other side, on our side of the Higgs field, we have mass for the first time. And we don't know where it comes from. Particles just come bouncing through the Higgs field, establish mass, and we can now for the first time begin to have things like atoms and electrons and protons and all kinds of things. We call it energy collapses into matter. Collapses. I love that word. That's the scientific word. Energy collapses into matter. To tell you the honest truth, that's about the best science can say, but they do it very well. They will say it with a great deal of effort. Yes, well, energy just collapses into matter on this side of the Higgs field, and we all are so intimidated by this genius saying that we say, okay, what does that mean? Who knows, but it happens. Yes?
What about Dr. Walter Russell's work?
Pardon me?
Dr. Walter Russell's work?
Could talk about it a minute. I'm not sure. Dr. Walter Russell.
I've heard it. I read everything.
Go ahead. Anybody? Yeah, help me out here.
He was the greatest scientist of our time, and his work is still suppressed until this cosmic age,
Okay.
this electric age, where
Yeah.
it's going to be revealed.
Yeah. Now I'm on. Okay. Now I know who you're talking about. I didn't put the work and the name together. Right. Yeah.
Also Russell Mills,
Yeah.
who has the new electricity.
For those of you who are in the back and can't hear this, we're talking about different people who have predicted and talked about this for years. Some of whom, sadly, died and some of whom have even been so ostracized that they have taken their own life because they were so down they couldn't get a job. And now all of a sudden we're discovering they knew what they were talking about. Hugh Everett comes to mind, for instance. Tragic story, and yet now everybody believes what he was saying for all of these years. So it's really something. When something moves through the Higgs field and energy begins to take on mass, finally we get to the perception realm that we experience here. And that's what I call the material reality manifested. It's the world of the multiverse. It's the world of dark matter. It's the world of all these strange ideas, string theory and all of this stuff. It's the world where all of a sudden that thought that began way back at the source and moved through the idea of consciousness into individuality, that moved through the Akashic field, that moved into quantum reality, that blasted through the Higgs field and came here, and all of a sudden we find energy taking on mass for the first time. So when someone says to you, "Who are you? How did you get here?" You can say, "I came from the source. It was peaceful there. Used to be able to sleep all night long there. You know, it was wonderful. But I needed to experience something, so I became unique. I became an idea. And I moved outward away from the source through these various fields until eventually I came out here to the edge. And here I am in a body made up of matter. Where are you going? Well, someday this matter is going to serve its purpose and it's going to collapse. And I'm going right back the same way I came. I'm going back through the Higgs field. I'm going back through quantum reality. I'm going back through consciousness. I'm going to go back to the source and get a good night's sleep before I decide to try it again. And on and outward we go. We have to be a little bit careful here, because if our purpose in life is to experience everything there is, not each one of us, but all of us collectively, if our purpose is here to experience and gain experience of this, we have to understand this. We have to understand that we have to experience everything, not just the nice things. Sometimes we have to experience the bad things. Why does it happen? Why are there wars? Why do people do what they do? Why do people say what they do? Because we are experiencing everything there is. And there's a wonderful, wonderful world out there of nice stuff, that's good stuff. But out here in this perception realm, it comes with a yin and a yang. It comes with good and bad. And we have to experience it all. Take it back to Akasha. Share the energy. Go back to the collective, so to speak. And we have to take this experience back. That's why we're living in this crazy, crazy world in which we live. Now, does that mean we just accept it? Well, some Buddhists would say that. You just accept everything what it is, the good and the bad, find the middle way between. Other people would, other religions would, like Christianity, for instance, would say, no, you identify with the good and you move away from the bad. All different ways of dealing with it, but all understand this idea of good and bad. Yes?
You said you had to take this experience back to where?
Yes, back to
where?
back to the source.
Back to the source.
Yes.
Why?
Pardon me?
Why?
Because the purpose of leaving the source was to gain experiential knowledge, which we couldn't gain in
Are you
the
saying
source.
that the source doesn't have no experiential knowledge?
Doesn't have the, how can I put this? It doesn't have the experience of being individualized, because everything is in unity in the source. Let me put it this way. When we come out here on the edge, where we're all living right now, we're all living on the edge. We are out here on the edge. We are establishing, we have the idea of a self. And we talk, and this self is speaking when we say, my eyes, my hair, my body, my brain, my consciousness, my soul. Who's the my?
Well, it's like the Catholic Church says that Jesus is God in body.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't believe that, but that would,
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus came in a person because we couldn't see God, So,
And then return to the source. That's the idea behind the theology, yeah. So here we are. We're experiencing self, and the idea is out here the best we can do is establish selflessness. But out here we can also display selfishness. So here we are now. I could go on and on, but our time is running out. But the purpose then thing is to experience individuality out here. Now here comes the part that I just love. It just blows me away. Out here we are experiencing individuality, and the only way we can experience individuality is to be separate. I'm an individual, you're an individual, we are separate from each other. We may be as close as we can, but we're still separate from each other because we are both individuals. When we take this experience back to the source, what do we have? We have the idea of individuality within unity. And it's an experience that we never could have had we not come out here on the edge and spent some time, maybe a lot of times, making the trip back and forth. So, like I say, this is simply a mental construct. Can I say that this is the way it is? Well, no, I can't. It's simply the way it appears to me to be right now. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the next thing? What do we do with this as Dowsers? We're in about 15 minutes to go, tops? 20 minutes to go, tops? Okay, did you bring dowsing tools of any kind with you? If you have, you'll need them. If you don't have them, don't worry about it. We'll do some toolless dowsing too. But what we want to do is take all this information that we've been talking about and try to find a way to make it practical. I mean, it's nice to have the theory, but what do we do with the theory? How do we use it? Well, what I'd like to do is try to dowse the quantum field right here. Try to dowse Akasha. Try to dowse those other entities that are here. Now, we have to understand that we're going to try to do this not with the traditional language of the dowser, perhaps, but we're going to use the language of the scientists. After all, we are elders taking this message to the scientist. And remember, the scientist, no matter how smart he sounds, he has the same fears that you do about the future. He has the same trouble with relationships. The scientist has to get up in the morning and eat breakfast and go to work just like you do. He wonders also, he may not say this, but he wonders also, why am I really here? What is the purpose of it all? Can you imagine what it would be if we could take to him what we know as Dowsers and take to that scientist, him or her, an idea, a meaning, of reality that says, why are we here? What happens when we die? Where did we come from? Now, we can intuit all this, of course, as Dowsers, and we can experience it, but how do we put it in a language that other people can try to understand? It's unbelievable to me that when we do this, even using the language of the scientist, what we come up with is a process that has been used by Dowsers for thousands of years. Hasn't changed a bit. All we're doing is changing the language a little bit. The restaurant has been sold. The menu remains the same. That's what we're talking about. So what I would like to do just for a second here is do a little exercise on meditating on some of the stuff that we've been talking about. And you'll find it's very similar to what all of you probably do in meditation when you're dowsing, but now maybe understanding it in this cosmic way or with the language of the scientist in our minds, it might change a little bit. For instance, if we deeply meditate on the fact that we are intimately connected with all that is, what we are saying is out here on the edge, we are, in the word of the scientist, entangled with what we have always been. I discovered this totally by accident, and I'm not saying that my position is unique, or I'm not saying it is even the correct way. I was dowsing, I came to dowsing in a weird fashion. I was a Christian Protestant minister, and when I retired from the ministry, I retired with an agenda. See, all my life I've been preaching about God. All my life I've been preaching about spirituality. My agenda was now, okay, God, you and me, one-on-one. I want to experience you. No more of this peekaboo religion. No more of this idea that I'm going to hide from you, you know. I'm going to, no more of this God saying, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll make some kind of a weird thing happen, and you put that together and say, oh, God must have done it. No more of that, God. I want to experience you. So we moved out to the woods. We built a house out in the woods. We built to get back there. And our agenda was, God, I'm going to take you on, God, you and me, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And, you know, you say you want a challenge? Here's your challenge. I went out there, and strangest thing happened. God answered my challenge. It was kind of like Jacob of old wrestling with God, saying, I will not let you go until you bless me. I have to take, I hope I have time to do this. I've got to tell you this story. That was literally the verse that was in my mind, and the phrase that was in my mind when I retired to the woods. I will not let you go until you bless me. And it's a chapter. It's a verse from the book of Genesis. If you know the story, Jacob is about to be reunited with his brother Esau, and the night before he doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's worried, and he comes out there, and an angel of God, or perhaps an incarnation of God himself, comes and wrestles with Jacob all night. Jacob is wrestling with God all night. And he finally says, I will not, when the morning is coming, he says, I will not let you go until you bless me. And then God reveals a great lesson to him. That was the mind was on mine. I wrestle with God and I will not let you go until you bless me. A couple of years ago, I was asked to go over to Cornwall in England and speak for a group over there called the Parallel Community. And they wanted me to come, and I was excited about it because I was going to have high tea with Bob Miller, Hamish Miller's wife, you know, and I was going to be speaking, doing an afternoon workshop on world religions and all of this kind of, and I was really excited about it. But after it was all over, and I had a chance to go dowsing with a former chair of the British Dowsing Association. I learned that we were dowsing the Merry Maidens and dowsing all these things. But on the way home, I rented a car, learned to drive on the wrong side of the street, on the wrong side of the car, drove all the way up to a little town called Fenny-Compton, where my ancestors used to be priests in the Anglican church up there. And I had a chance to go into this church where my great-great-great-great, I don't know how many generations ago, used to preach. And I stood up in the pulpit. And when I was up in that pulpit, wondering what that ancient person would discover if his ancestor way down the line, who was now dowsing up at Merry Maidens, wonder what he would have thought. I looked over and saw what my ancestor saw every time. It was a stained glass window, and on the stained glass window was a picture of Jacob wrestling with God. Whew. I will not let you go until you bless me. Well, one day I got up in the morning, and for some reason, I don't know why, I didn't believe in dowsing. I had seen some people find water and that kind of thing. I decided, got to learn how to dowse. So Barb was still sleeping. I got in the car and went down to the hardware store and tried to get some copper or brass rods, and they didn't have any. The local hardware store didn't even sell dowsing equipment. I don't understand why. And I got a couple of pieces of copper wire, the biggest I could find, and came home, bent them in half, and I said, I'm going to learn how to dowse. I'm going to go out and find water. And I went out and I walked around all day and nothing. Couldn't find a thing. So I did what everybody does in a situation like that. I went on the internet and I Googled dowsing. You ever Googled just dowsing on the internet? It'll keep you going for weeks, you know. And I found something about earth energy, and that sounded kind of interesting. And so I came back, and now Barb was taking a nap. She slept a lot that day, and that was good. And I decided, well, she's not going to see me know how crazy I am. And I got my dowsing rods, and I went out there looking for earth energy, concentrating on earth energy, and took the step that has changed my life forever. All of a sudden, boom, the rods went like this, and I couldn't believe it. We had built our house right in a place where a ley line that nobody up to that point that I knew had found. and it was an energy ley line that ran all the way from the Pacific Ocean all the way, and I have traced this on a map. We've gone on every place we can find it, 84 inches long, and the number of ancient sites, the mound builders, and the ancient sites that we've seen on this line are just absolutely unbelievable. Runs all the way across the country. And here we were called to this place, to this particular place, to build a house at this particular place, knowing nothing about this, because that is what I needed to do if I was going to wrestle with God. And God had to reveal God's self to me in a way that was totally outside my tradition, or I never would have got it. Thank you, God. It has changed my life completely. But in dowsing, I had already established a yes answer. I could say, show me a yes, and it worked. And I could say, show me a no, and they just stood there. One day, I found myself talking, and we were in this wonderful congregation, and I would say, is the sky blue? Yeah. Is the sky red? No. And all of a sudden, I asked a question that hesitated, and I felt something strange inside. And something happened. I don't want to give away the name, so I'll do it on purpose now. The rods did this. What? So I asked a couple more yes questions, but sometimes the rods would hesitate, and then they do this. And I began to think this is now a three-way conversation. And lo and behold, over the years, to make a long story short, I discovered this other entity. The name was even revealed to me. The name that we use is Sabuko. And I can still say it now, Sabuko, are you here? Yeah, Sabuko. And I began to understand that Sabuko was me on the other side.
Oh, wow. An aspect.
Some people call it a higher self. Some people call it a guardian angel. But I began to understand that, and this took years now, of course, but I began to understand that Sabuko is me on the other side. And from Sabuko, I have come and probably lived many lives. They all have one name, and the name is Elion. I wear it with me here to remind me who I am. But we are all out here gathering experience, but we have left part of us on the other side. Now, how do we explain that to a scientist, right? They're going to think we're absolutely nuts. So the first part of this exercise is to meditate deeply on the fact that we are intimately connected or entangled, both physically and spiritually, with the stuff of the universe. Nothing happens out there that doesn't happen in here. And that's where Hinduism comes in so good, because we were talking earlier about Brahman. Brahman never comes alone. Brahman is always connected with Atman. What is Atman? The only English word that comes close is soul. Atman is the inner essence of what is out there. What is out there is here. And the great, great Hindu word is thou art that. We would say that we are one with the universe. But to the scientists, we can just as easily say we are entangled with all that there is, because that's where we come from. Is it all in our mind? No, it's in every single cell of our body, which has made the journey through the Higgs field and everything else. We are the reality. Atman, the soul. We are the reality. The body's changing all the time. Cells are sloughing off. We're going to leave billions of cells in this room when we leave. Aren't you glad you came here today to learn that? Oh, they're changing all the time. But the essence of what it is Atman. That's us. We are here. And the idea is that we have to be able to say to the scientists, we are entangled with all that is. So the scientists can say, entanglement, I can understand. One with the universe, no, that's too weird. Same thing, just a different word, a different way of explaining it. Now comes the next part. We form a mental picture of our higher self, our spirit guide, our guardian angel, or whatever word you want to use that best describes the essential you. I like the word Atman, some people like the word soul. It's eternally present on the other side. You are out there as well as here. That is a comforting thought sometimes when you're feeling really low. You're out there as well as here. What you are experiencing is something you have to experience, and you came here to experience it. So don't worry about it. Everything is as it should be. Everything is going along just fine. Now, how do you understand this being from the other side? Here's where it gets tricky. When you are deeply meditating, and you are experiencing something on the other side, me when it was Sabuko, me on the other side, or the higher spirit, the guardian angel, you are going to have to form in your mind will form a mental picture of what you are seeing. Now, is that mental picture accurate? Well, it's accurate for you. Your mind has to go through all the Rolodex of experiences that you've ever had and pick out something which your mind can then understand, which is totally different than anything you've ever experienced it. And if you do experience it, you wouldn't have any words to explain it. It's the old shamanic saying, you know, when you go on a journey, you go someplace where language is inadequate, and then you come back and try to explain it where language is insufficient. Basically, that's what it amounts to. So you're going to have a mental picture in your mind. I picture Sabuko in my mind. It's an ancient Indian shaman who I'm convinced, once lived on the very same piece of property that I'm on now. And Sabuko's told me all kinds of wonderful things. I was called home for a reason. And so I have this picture of this Indian shaman in my mind, and I can tell you exactly what he looks like. Does he look like that? No. But it's the only way I can picture it in my mind. It's an energy, a totally different energy. Now, some people, in some cultures, for instance, will go out into the woods and they'll see leprechauns, because that's what their culture has pictured for them. Other people will go out in the woods and they'll see fairies, and they'll say, oh, fairies. Now, the problem is we form denominations in Dowsing, just like Christians do. No, the energies, they look like fairies. You know, we're the fairy denomination. No, they don't look like fairies, they look like leprechauns. We're the leprechaun denomination, you know, that kind of thing. It'll be different for each one of you. Some of you might picture not a being at all, but light, or a thing of light, or something like that. And you have to have an image in your mind, because that's the way it works. Our minds have to give us something to concentrate on. So what I'd like to ask you to do is just have a moment of silence and deeply meditate on the fact that you are entangled with all that is. Brahman, the undescribable, is within you. Atman, Brahman, thou art that. Now, how can you begin to negotiate that? So, you take your dowsing implement, and concentrating on that, you say, I want you to reveal yourself to me. Give me a yes that you are here. Thank you, Sabuko. And now look at your mind and visualize what you are seeing. It'll be different for every single person who is here. Some of us will see a human form, some of us will see an energy form, some of us will see a light form. Some of us will see within the tradition of the particular culture whose genes flow in our DNA. Picture that entity. Now say, give me a yes if this is you that I am seeing. And now you ask the $64,000 question, I guess. What is a yes so that I can contact you now for the rest of my life? Give me a yes. Show me who you are. And know that that entity that you are looking at right now in your mind is you on the other side, the protector, the guide, the one who has never left you, the one who cannot leave you, because that one is you. If you are here, show me a yes. Show me your sign for yes. Will this yes be a sign between us for the rest of my life in this perception realm? Thank you, Subhuka. Thank you. I would love to do this for a while more, except that we're running out of time. How many of you could connect? Some of you, even just now you did. Great, great. For some of you, it may take a while longer. I've got to. After this, it's just like any other dowsing exercise. The being on the other side has to learn how to talk to you, and you've got to learn to talk to that being. So you've got to develop your own language, establishing a firm yes or no. And then comes the hard part. As soon as you've had an experience with this being, and I can't emphasize this enough, there will come a time when you will begin to doubt it. I just made it up, all in my head. It's not real. If you're like me, you're going to be a big doubter. And this poor entity is going to have to beat you upon the head to keep your attention. Remember, when that happens, the entity that you are picturing in your mind probably is made up. The entity that you're talking to probably doesn't look like that. It's the entity in your mind that you have established that is it a crutch? Yeah, but we're designed so these bodies work in a certain way. And we have to have that mental picture. So perhaps the crutch is made up in your mind, but the entity which that being represents really is. That is the real. And after that, it's just a matter of practice, 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 and you can have fun with this. I always say trust, but verify. Ask questions, and you're going to say, I'm going to wrestle with you. I'm going to wrestle all night with you, God. You know, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. I'm going to ask you questions I don't know the answer to. And you give me questions. You give me answers. But I'm going to check you up on it. I'm going to find out. And I guarantee, practice, 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 and you'll love it for the rest of your life. And my wife is going back like this. So I'm afraid that's going to cut our questions, our formal question period. But if you have any questions, feel free. There are some books that I've written over the past. This is the book, The Dragon Awakes, that talks about our moving out to Plum Branch and building the house and discovering ley lines and all that kind of stuff. Other stuff that I've done. On September the 1st, my new book called Supernatural Gods is coming out, which is about a 500-page book that deals with a lot of stuff we did here in an hour. So I hope you'll watch for it. September the 1st it'll be out. Amazon's already advertising it, and it's also through the publisher Visible Link, and you can find it on just Google Jim Willis Supernatural Gods or Jim Willis Ancient Gods, and you know my website will be there. It's on the material we passed out, and pardon me?
What's the name of the new book?
The new book is called Supernatural Gods, and it has a long subtitle, and I'm not sure what it is. It's in the handout? Okay, good. Hey, thank you all. We covered a huge bunch of stuff. Appreciate it. Make sure to meet somebody if you hadn't met them yet. Find somebody you don't know and introduce yourself.